Well, as a matter of fact, let's jump ahead here because I was going to bring something else up, but this is the perfect segue because as much as they try to just discredit what we say over here on our completely unbiased program, because everybody knows when it comes down to it, we hate all these fucking shows. But they try to discredit this, but apparently the beacon of the other side of the aisle, Brian, in the wrestling game, the fun-loving young folks, the lollipop guilds, the wrestling fun lovers of the world, led by our Uncle Dave. Uncle Dave is getting more and more calls of bullshit and horseshit and various other types of barnyard animal fecal matter over things that he reports as being fact. And in this case, I believe the term actually used was horseshit. Was it not, for Dave's reporting on something that we were kind of taking a piss out of the other day? But do you have that information in front of you?
Yeah, there were a couple of recent things. And again, we've talked recently on the air because they became stories that people were talking about, things that were in the Observer or things that Dave Meltzer had said on his audio show or on his website, on his message board. And they've been proven false, or he was clearly fed something that wasn't entirely true. There's been a lot more of that reported over the last year, last 6 months, last couple weeks. It's kind of growing in numbers how many times this has been happening lately, and it just happened back to back. And the one you're referring to here, that we'll talk about first, is The Rock. We just talked about on the drive-thru the article that Dave Meltzer had on his website, and then it was in the Observer, about talent feeling there was a double standard for Dwayne Johnson. You and I talked about it, we even debated it. The idea that, yes, he's a top star, there is a double standard, and there should be. I think was your point, and even maybe Dave's point. Well, a Twitter account, WrestleLamia.com, put up here a headline, Wrestling Observer newsletter, TKO would like The Rock to follow and set a good example. Its guidelines of TV PG product. However, many feel the double standards of the Vince McMahon era are back.
Which is pretty much what a quote from Dave's story when he ended one of his dramatic paragraphs, wringing his hands over this dire matter by saying, well, many feel the double standards under Vince are back now.
Well, the only thing, though, it says here TKO would like The Rock to follow its guidelines of TV PG product. It's kind of the opposite, though. He's doing this because they're okay with The Rock doing The Rock's thing.
Right.
So the story's kind of...
Which Dave didn't get either.
Well, Dwayne Johnson replied, shortly before doing some charitable act that he filmed himself, this story is complete horseshit. So there it is. Now, for the record, though, to be fair, what Dave's saying here may not be the perspective of Dwayne Johnson. If it is true, and Dave's hearing from talent in that company who are clearly not in the main event of WrestleMania, or at least not this participant, and they're citing a frustration with what they perceive as a double standard, whether it's necessary or not, that doesn't mean Dwayne Johnson would kind of be, he's not one of the rank and file boys, whether he thinks he is or isn't. So it's not crazy that this could be true and Dwayne Johnson could say it's false and believe it's false.
Well, the whole thing is not only the slant that Dave is trying to go for is to gin up everybody to go, oh, well, Jesus Christ, The Rock's doing this and that, but not even to help their business, not even to make him a better heel, but just because he believes, oh, it's so terrible that there's this double standard back. No, it's always, and he even says, well, it's always been that way, and then spends, however long crying about it and woe is me about it. And we said from this is ridiculous on the face of it. No, it's not like The Rock is going out there and going into business for himself in a major way, completely deviating from anything that the company would want him to say. if he dribbles a Rodney Carrington line in every once in a while or whatever the fuck. I think again, we can probably survive. But the point is that Dave, again, is listening to underneath guys that are always going to be ticked off that they're not being used, or the occasional main event guy that's pissed that he ain't The Rock and being used like The Rock. Well, why can't I do that? And you don't know who that might be, but probably, somebody with a fucking still an indie mindset that you can't wring out of them some way or another.
But what if it's about the boundaries? That's the thing. The Rock gets to. I'm not saying every wrestler should do this. It's not the case, but The Rock called the audience a few weeks ago crackheads a few times. Would any other wrestler on the roster have been allowed to use that kind of phrasing? Because that's one of the things that separates The Rock from everyone else. He's allowed to use phrasing that others would not be allowed to use. Do you agree with that?
Yes, I do. And I also agree that here's the thing, he didn't just come out and say, you people are a dirty, disgusting bunch of crackheads and have the evil, movie villain laugh. He makes it fun. There's a way that they can defend it if someone was to complain. Then, it was, the rhyming shit or the Cody Crybabies or whatever the fuck.
But I'm not even talking about the complaining. That aside, just the idea of what you're allowed to do out there if you're trying to get over or stay over, and the various wrestlers who are doing promos on these promo-driven shows, not everyone has the flexibility. The complaining that there's a double standard, some of it might include that, just the flexibility of what you're allowed to do out there.
Okay, but then they allowed Cody to do pretty much the same thing, although more befitting material that he would deliver, but with language. And again, if you can't get over and make people believe you without adhering to goddamn television standards, which now the PG television standards are looser than in the 80s, when there were many more wrestling programs on the air and a bunch of people got over. If I'm not discounting bad booking or just being slotted into a stupid position or being, next to Karrion Kross as a death slot or whatever. Some things can't overcome. But still somebody that is good enough at promos to be able to make a case that they should be in The Rock's atmosphere, treated like The Rock, allowed to go as far as The Rock or Cody or whoever the fucking top guy is. You can prove yourself being worthy of that verbally without fucking cussing or, talking about, something, violating their principles at this point. Does that make sense? Am I saying it correctly?
I think you're saying it correctly because it's what you want to say and it makes sense, but that's the thing. There are different perspectives here. And the fact that The Rock would come out there and, even though it's not a Dave tweet that he's responding to, it's Dave's story that he's responding to, say it's complete horseshit, what does that tell you? The fact that he would want to get out there, because usually his tweets are either in character, doing promos lately, or over-the-top kindness, just to show people that, and Bill Maher just made fun of him, I think, for having his new products out there that he's selling.
He's got a shampoo now.
Yeah.
And he's bald.
He's bald. He has shampoo. So, that's usually what he does. He doesn't usually say, this is horse shit. What does that tell you, that he did it?
That tells me probably that he's pissed off because of all the things that could be talked about, that Dave is making a deal out of this. And, they go way back, Dave and his family. Dave was friends with his mom and etc.
There was a blood oath made years ago at the Cow Palace.
Yes.
Between a young teenage Dave Meltzer on his bicycle and Rocky Johnson. And since that time, they've all been family. Crazy Cousin Dave, they call him.
But I don't know whether Rock wants to come right out and smack him down directly or not, but he's not even dignifying it enough to joust with him. But that's the thing is that he doesn't have time to deal with bullshit from Uncle Dave, and Dave is more and more of an old lady about some of this stuff that you would there's not going to be a time where the two or three or four guys on top are not allowed, if they have the talent and the way to twist it to where it can be entertaining and where it can fucking and or flow naturally or whatever. And they're going to have to, and they're going to be allowed to go a little farther because they're the ones that have to be drawing the money.
Well, Jim, before we move on from this, Dave Meltzer apparently has commented a couple times since The Rock responded on Twitter. Someone named Papa Shango, but with an extra N, I guess to get around trademark infringement, tweeted out, Dave, is there context into this too? Laugh out loud with a, that was responding to The Rock's comment. And Dave wrote, you mean, first of all, I never said TKO wanted him to change anything. I wrote that because he's The Rock, he could do what he wants. You always cater to people of that level, whether in wrestling or other endeavors. Somehow, that was changed in translation to something me or the other reporter who had the basic same story both never
Jesus
said.
Christ.
So that was his first response. Any thoughts on that?
He's getting quite upset about this kind of thing when people criticize him these days, isn't he? On the Twitter machine and otherwise, he didn't used to be so angry and confrontational, poor old Dave.
And then someone responded to him, someone named Brandon Thompson. I think I listened to the exact Wrestling Observer Radio where this was talked about. Dave never said anyone asked The Rock to do anything. WWE was going to let The Rock do what he wants. Dave and Brian did say USA had the script, so they know when to bleep words, and Dave responded, I'm sure he wouldn't like what some talent said for the story, but other talent have said similar elsewhere. That said, we've also constantly pointed out his value at the box office and for company perception, in ways a lot of people don't consider, such as him being there engages a lot of heavy hitters who wouldn't engage in WWE business otherwise and has to greatly help in making deals and sponsorships, period. A lot of people don't get this aspect of business, and you can't overstate his value, which is why he got a $30 million deal.
Is Dave paying some kind of fee where he can just type endlessly on Twitter?
Yeah, the blue check mark. He's paying for the... Once you get the blue check mark, you can put anything you want.
Seriously, you can?
Yeah.
Good Lord, how does he have time in the day? Seriously, how does Dave Meltzer have time in the day besides sleeping and potentially eating to do his newsletter and still engage with everybody on Twitter in paragraphs at a time?
The saddest thing is I read in Tokyo Sports that Dave was arguing on Twitter one day when the doctor from Tokyo was calling to say, no, before you go to press, I didn't remove his brain. His brain did not come out of his head. Don't print it. But Dave was on Twitter fighting with people over nothing.
But see, that's the thing is in everything that Dave writes, he will, in one place or another in that piece, take both sides of the issue. So no matter who says what to disagree with him, he can point out, well, I did say that so-and-so could be right, but he also said the other guy could be right.
You know, there is truth to the idea that things change, but when you constantly say, here's what it's going to happen, but things change, and it's always the cover, I don't know. You can't use that as your cover for everything.
Well, he writes both things anyway and everything. Yes, he did say that, well, they're always going to let The Rock do what The Rock wants to do. That's what I said. But then he proceeded to, as I said, tell a tale of sorrow and woe that would bring a tear to a glass eye about how it's upset everybody in the world that The Rock is allowed to do all these things.
See, he got to defend. All he had to say was, I spoke to sources who disagree with what Dwayne Johnson is saying. That's it. That's all you have to say. Whether people agree with it or not, that's all you have to say. Not whatever this giant run-on sentence was here on Twitter.
He's very indignant about these things these days.